So the next type of subordinate or dependent clause we have is called a relative clause, which we call a rel CL. So I called the agent who wanted to speak to me. So this whole clause is describing the noun agent. So that's going to be the function of these relative clauses. Now, we can see some more examples here and just the basic structure. So the book that Carol read is pretty interesting. So that Carol read is describing the book. Therefore, in the tree structure, we're going to see a rel clause modifier. The man who sold the scooters is a cutie. So who sold the scooters is describing the man. This is more information and details about the man. Therefore, this whole thing is going to be a relative clause modifier. Now, this has a subject and predicate. The pronoun who or the pronoun that or the pronoun which will be acting as the subject if a subject isn't obviously existing there. And then we have the verb as well in a tensed form. So when you want to create a relative clause, you can think about combining two sentences to create one new sentence while eliminating redundancy. So with relative clauses, you need to imagine you have two sentences that have the exact same noun phrase. So Kristen went to the store and the store sold alcohol. So what we can do is we can choose one of these to be the independent clause. So I'm going to choose Kristen went to the store as the independent clause. And then we're going to have one that acts as the dependent one, so giving more information. So we'll say the store sold alcohol as the dependent. So now we're going to introduce the information in the dependent clause as extra information on that head noun in the independent. So Kristen went to the store, then here's the exclamation, that sold alcohol. So we're going to see how we can form these. So one important piece of terminology is that the relative clause is modifying what's called its antecedent. So that's the noun. So that was served in the restaurant. Its antecedent is sushi. Potato that Mark enjoyed, the antecedent is potato. The comic book that sold extremely well, book here is the antecedent. That sold extremely well is describing book. So let's see the process. We start basically with two sentences. The movie was pretty interesting. You watched the movie. So I'm choosing one to be the independent clause and two to be the dependent clause. We're sticking two into one. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to replace the redundant noun phrase in the second sentence with either the word that, who, or which. And that's going to depend on what is being described after. Who for people, that when you have a restrictive relative, and which when you have a non-restrictive relative. We'll talk about those later in this section. So now, in our dependent clause, we're going to do movement. We're going to take that relative pronoun, that, and we're going to move it to the front. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to take everything in two that we had with that original gap and just stick it right after the noun phrase in the first sentence. So now we have the movie that you watched was pretty interesting. So it's important to note here that we do have movement because we had a noun phrase direct object moving up and taking the position at the front. So you can imagine in a relative clause, we're going to have to remember what that function is for that relative pronoun. So here is what it looks like in a tree structure. So first, let's start with just the dependent clause. You watched the movie. So the first thing we do is replacement. So this whole thing, the movie, gets replaced with a relative pronoun that hosted under a noun phrase. So once that happens, we're going to do some movement. So you watch that, this bit right here, is going to get moved up into a new relative clause. So relative clause forms above the sentence, and then whatever moved is being hosted under it. So now this is that you watched. So finally, what we do is we embed it. So the movie was pretty interesting is what we originally had, and we just embedded our that you watched relative clause directly into the sentence to the right of the original noun. And that is how we create a relative clause inside of our sentences. So I want you to try to make relative clauses from these. So pause the video, see if you can do this. The first sentence is the independent, the second sentence is the dependent. So I will now go over the solutions. So this is that dog is mine, and the dog ate all the dandelions. So we're going to have the dog ate all the dandelions as the dependent clause. But the redundant bit is the dog. So I'm going to replace the dog. So we're going to put a little gap here. with the word who and move it to the front. So now I have who ate all the dandelions. And now I'm just going to type out my original sentence and put this out right after the noun. So I get the dog who ate all the dandelions is mine. Okay, what about number 2? I know the man caused the accident. So we'll start with the man caused the accident. Okay, the man is the redundant element here, so I'm going to replace this with the word who and leave a gap where it originally was. And then I'll just start typing the rest of the sentence. I know the man who caused the accident. Okay, what about 3? The hostess brought cake. I really love the hostess. So it's I really love the hostess. What's the redundant element? The hostess. So I'm going to replace this with a gap. And I'm going to put who at the front of the sentence there. And now I'm just going to type out the rest of the sentence, the hostess, leaving who I really love after that original noun because that's the redundant element. And then brought cake. So 4, the woman is a famous author. John was talking about the woman. So John was talking about the woman. The woman is the redundant element. So we're going to just leave a little gap there, put who at the front. So who John was talking about. Now I'm going to get the woman who John was talking about is a famous author. So what I like about each of these sentences is that a different thing is being moved. So in 2, what we have is we have the subject moving. In 3, we have the direct object moving. And in 4, we have an object of a preposition moving. So that's going to be the functions of these words who, and who in 2, 3, and 4. So I have 2 more examples of relative clauses here with the full structure being shown. The first one is that Jim talked about. So we can see it would be Jim talked about something. And that something in this original position would be an object of a preposition. But what's going to happen is this is going to be replaced with a relative pronoun like who or that. And then it's going to get moved up to the front of the relative clause. And you're going to get that Jim talked about. So this still has the function NP object of preposition, just like you would have when you do movement in questions. So here's another sentence. Jolly gave something a flower, or Jolly gave someone a flower. So what should be originally in this position is an NP indirect object. So whatever that would be, we would replace that with a relative pronoun, and then we would take that and we would move it up to the front of the relative clause modifier, and that is where we would get who gave, or who Jolly gave a flower in this case. So our relative pronouns can have the same functions that NPs can have. So subjects, direct objects, predicate nominals, adverbials, and so on. So we can have relative pronouns too. So where, when, and why. This will be for place of time or location. So we can say that these are adverbial phrase, adverbials, but I would prefer an NP adverbial because we're hosting a pronoun under. So the reason why I bring this up now is unimportant. So this would come from the basic sentence, I bring this up now because blah, 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 blah. So this would be your basic sentence. I bring this up now, and then here we would have an adverbial phrase or maybe even adverbial clause here with a because that is explaining some more information. So that would get replaced with a word like why or how or when or where, and then that gets moved up the front of the relative clause. So what we end up with in the end here is the reason why I should bring this up now. Movement from the adverbial position to the front of the relative clause. No change in category. We're just using a different WH word. So if we have the sentence, I pranked the con artist that stole my phone, what is the relative clause? So the relative clause here is that stole my phone. That's describing the con artist. So what is the function of that in the relative clause? Well, we have to think about what the original sentence was. So we can do that, who stole my phone. So something stole your phone. So it looks like in the original sentence, we had someone stole my phone, which means that this is going to be a subject. What is the category and function of that in the relative clause? This is going to be a relative pronoun. What is the antecedent of the relative clause? So that stole my phone is describing the con artist. So that is the antecedent for that relative clause. And now we want to draw the tree structure for the entire sentence. So I pranked the con artist that stole my phone. Let's add a new page. So I'm going to start from the top down here. I don't normally do this, but for the sake of the relative clause, I will. So this is the sentence and then it was pranked the con artist that stole my phone. So this is going to be a verb phrase predicate with the transitive verb pranked. Now we have a noun phrase direct object, which has a definite determiner. Gonna have a noun that is going to be con artist. And now we're finally going to get into our relative clause modifier. So this is who stole my phone, the con artist who stole my phone. So we know we're going to have a relative pronoun up front, and that is replacing the subject in this case. So that's a relative pronoun, and that would be who. And now for our original sentence, we're going to have who stole my phone. So the original noun phrase subject is being moved to be who, and then we're just left with a verb phrase predicate with the transitive verb stole, and then we have a noun phrase direct object with a possessive determiner my, and then the head noun phone. So this would be the sentence, I pranked the con artist who stole my phone. Who stole my phone is acting as a relative clause that's describing the con artist, and who originally was the subject that was moved up to form the relative clause. So next time we're going to talk about how we can omit the relative pronoun and still draw that structure. So if you have a relative pronoun that is not replacing the subject of the relative clause, we can delete it. So we cannot pronounce it and the sentence is still grammatical. So if we have a subject like the man that came in was creepy, we still have to say that. We can't say the man came in was creepy. And the reason for this is because the brain is organized in a way that when it sees this, it thinks it's the verb in the matrix clause, because you'd say the man came in, and then suddenly when you get to was creepy, it's like, hold on, what's happening here? I thought the sentence was over. So the brain kind of optimizes itself and says, well, okay, if we have a subject, we'll put that in. But for direct objects, indirect objects, objects of prepositions, we do not need that. So the books that I want are always checked out. That here was functioning as a direct object. So we don't need to pronounce that in this case. We can just say the books I want are always checked out. And I want is still a relative clause. You can just think of that as being hidden before it and deleted. So this is what it would look like in the books I want are not in stock. Or really, I'm just looking at the books that I want in this case, so just the noun phrase. So here, we have our relative clause modifier that I want. Everything is exactly as it was. I want that. That moves up to the front, that I want. But we just put a little cross through that. So we're saying it's not being pronounced. There's nothing there. And that's how we do the omitted relative pronoun and where we can do it. So relative clauses have different meanings depending on whether you have commas or not. So we have restrictive and non-restrictive relative clauses. What restrictive relative clauses do, like in the sentence, Northern Europeans who wear red hats are very tall, is what it's saying is it's restricting the set of nouns we're talking about. So we're talking about Northern Europeans, but then we restrict the set to those who only wear red hats. So all 5 of these people are Northern Europeans, but we're only talking about the ones wearing red hats. Now, in the case of non-restrictive, it means we're not restricting the set. So if we say Northern Europeans, comma, who wear red hats, comma, are very tall, what we're saying is that this is like, by the way, this is a property that all have. So Northern Europeans, comma, who wear red hats, I'm saying all of these are Northern Europeans, and all Northern Europeans wear red hats. So that's the difference between restrictive and non-restrictive. And usually you would use that for who with the restrictive, and you might use which with the non-restrictive, but there's no set argument for that. You can do either. So Here's the examples of the restrictives. Northern Europeans who wear red hats are very tall, yes, but the animal who is smiling is a dog. Notice in this case, we're restricting the set. There's two animals there, but we're only talking about a small portion of it. So one of the animals out of the two. So the animal who is smiling, we're restricting it to this thing, is a dog. Compare this to the non-restrictive relative clause. The animal, comma, who is smiling, comma, is a dog. We're only talking about one specific animal. We know it's smiling, so this bit is like extra information because we could just say the animal is a dog, but we're adding more information about it. So, based on these three sentences, ask yourselves, is each relative clause restrictive or non-restrictive? And the key here is just looking for commas or not. So students who take calculus are eligible for a prize. This is restrictive. We see no commas. We have the set of students, but we're specifically talking about the students who take calculus. Okay, teenagers who are always so overdramatic about everything eventually become more tolerable. This is a non-restrictive relative clause because we're talking about teenagers and we're kind of adding extra information. We're saying all teenagers eventually become more tolerable. Okay, the photographs that Steve took were always the most popular photographs in the exhibit. This is restrictive. We're talking about photographs, but then we're restricting it specifically to the ones that Steve took. So that is restrictive and non-restrictive relative clauses, and we're going to see the same thing with other types of phrases too.